process. So that's when we then gazetted an advert to invite members of the public to comment, as well as other media to supplement visibility and information in and around the process. Between then August and November of the same year, the NEC then, through the GMA, the implementing agency, reviewed the submissions that we received. And at a particular point, some of the comments were not about the process, but were more about the project. So it was comments that were questioning whether the project as a whole is viable. And with that in mind, then an independent technical paper was commissioned just to check if the anticipated or predicted economic and financial impacts, as well as the transport benefits of the extensions, indeed still hold. So that then became also outside, it's beyond the process that's legislated, but it was the GMA then performing a duty of caring around, making sure that the NEC is empowered with all possible information so that he is able to determine the route. The route then was determined on the 25th of May, and that's when you would have then seen it in various newspapers. It was on the GMA website, etc. And then, of course, outside of process, we as a GMA then also are undertaking stakeholder engagement, such as the engagement tonight, to make sure that we empower interested and affected parties, members of the community, with all the information that is necessary in and around this process. This I won't go much on, it's just a list of the stakeholders that we consulted in terms of government departments, other NECs, etc. As I mentioned, so in terms of the legislative process, when we invited comments from members of the public in 2021, between July and August, we then had a notice in the Provincial Gazette, but because we are aware that it's not a widely known platform, to share information, we then supplemented that advert with placing advert or the same advert in 5 newspapers, which include Sowetan, The Star, The Build, Randburg Sun, Sentin Chronicle, and then we also had it on the GMA website. So that's where we carried copies of the reports I spoke about earlier, and the comments were actually captured through the same website. This is just an excerpt of what the notice looked like, either in the Gazette or the newspapers. This is a summary of the submissions categorized into about 6 or 7 categories in terms of the themes of the comments that we received during the said period. Some were EIA related, in other words, they expressed concerns over the environmental impact of the proposed extensions. Those comments, then the immediate action is to respond to them as part of this process, but the issues raised will be further investigated with a full environmental impact assessment, which is undertaken in the next step of the process. There were those where it was just a simple request for further information that was provided. There would be general comments, but they still were given the attention that is necessary and they were responded to. And those that touch on issues of design will be further refined in the next step of the process. There were those where they were in objection to the alignments, but the reasons for objection are also to be investigated in the detail, in the next phase, where there will actually be a design of the railway line. Bearing in mind that the route determination it just gives us this 400-meter wide corridor within which then to design the future system. There were those where it was an objection to the project, and that's the one where I mentioned them that to test those, or to understand and make sure those concerns are responded to accordingly, a technical paper then was undertaken to test the economic and financial impact of the system. We had about 100 registrations of interested and affected parties, so these are people that wish them to be kept or in the loop or to be provided with information as the process unfolds. And then there were a couple where it was no objection to the overall project and the process that we're undertaking. So what would have then been seen on the 25th of May 2022, when we speak about a determined route, would have been this graphic. The green is a center line of the two dotted lines on either side. So these dotted lines indicate this 400-meter wide land corridor that I had indicated then provides the basis for the design of the future railway system. This is then is just to illustrate then we follow the same logic.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could we go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
I'd like to look at it. And can we get copies of this?
Yes.
Will it be sent to us by email?
They are available on the GMA website, ma'am. Every report that we did, the technical, environmental. Yeah, sure. But we'll if it's not, we'll make sure. But it's supposed to. It was there on the 25th of May. So maybe something has happened in the interim. We can also share the presentation in its entirety. So I won't go much on this. It's just this is where we then publish that graphic as well as then the notice of the determined route. So what happens once a route has been determined? So these are the regulatory measures that come into play. So as I mentioned prior in my opening, so the establishment, any application that for an establishment of a township, subdivision of land, land use change, or environmental authorizations still goes to the local authority. So in our instance, it will still go to the city of Joburg. The city of Joburg then has to request the MEC for transport to provide comments. So the MEC doesn't reject or approve such applications. He or she simply provides comments. The responsibility to make the decision still remains with the local authority. In terms of the laying or constructing alteration of major infrastructure, pipelines, electricity lines, telephone lines, or any other structure which is outside of a registered servitude requires the MEC approval. So this would typically apply to GRA, Joburg Water, ESCOM, and then those entities. So if Rand Water, for instance, want to lay a new water supply line, a main line, we then have to engage the MEC to obtain the approval for that if it's outside of an existing servitude. In terms of what happens next, so once a route has been determined, the second step then is undertaken. So this is referred to as preliminary design. It provides literally a preliminary design for the future railway line. It enables the identification of properties that are directly or indirectly affected by the proposed future railway line. The process is carried out with extensive consultation with due regard to the interest of registered owners, holders of registered rights, municipalities, service providers, the environment, in respect of properties that are directly or indirectly affected. It includes a full environmental impact assessment, provides a basis then for the future steps, which are then proclamation, expropriation, and procurement, and provides more certainty in terms of what is the possible location of the future railway line. So, no, so what it does is the preliminary design and any future refinements thereof have to be within, but it doesn't mean that it's 400 meters wide. So as an example, the current Gautrain, I think at its narrow it's about 80 meters. 80. Yeah, so it doesn't span. So the widest point of the network is always the station. So yeah. Just quickly, what is preliminary design? It too is initiated by the MEC. So once the route determination has been concluded, which is the first step, then the preliminary design is initiated. It is governed by Section 8 of the GTIA. It also then commences with a preliminary design that is compiled So we go from a 400 meter wide corridor to an actual design. You now can see where's the fence, where's the railway line, where's the station building, where's the parking, etc. Where are the roads to access the station? What does the road network look like in the vicinity of the station? And the connectivity. That design then is subjected to a full EIA. So that includes fauna, flora, noise, vibration, social impact, economic impact, the whole, and that is legislated by the National Environmental Management Act, or NEMA. Then the consultation process then commences, where that is undertaken where the design is made public for comments and submissions, as well as the EIA. So the interested and affected parties have an opportunity to comment on the design itself, which is a preliminary design, as well as the comments process, which is legislated for the EIA. Once that consultation then has taken place, the MEC then for roads is given the proposed preliminary design, the EIA, with all the submissions that are received or the issues raised in the consultation process. For him or her then to consider prior to deciding whether to accept the design or not accept the design. What to note, so we have this 400 meter wide corridor that we would have determined in the first step. When the consultation process happens, the legislation does allow for the preliminary design to fall outside the determined route. And that happens through the consultation process. So we'll propose a design, and depending on what issues are raised and how it impacts the various interested and affected parties, the preliminary design may fall outside of the determined route. Of course, then there's consultation required with the stakeholders who are not necessarily affected in the determined route, but then become directly affected through this process. I know you asked a question earlier, sir. So excuse me if I'm repeating myself. I set up the presentation this way. So just to illustrate that, within this 400 meter wide corridor, the railway line will be narrower than the 400 meters. The reason why it's 400 meters is just to allow the geometric design of the railway line. So because it's a rapid rail system, speed is a factor, so your curves become shallower. And that's why then you've got the 400 meter wide corridor, just to allow then the geometric design of the system. Regulatory measures in terms of a preliminary design. So what happens when preliminary design has been accepted by the MEC? Similar to route determination, any application that the local authority receives for land use change or environmental authorizations goes to the local authority for approval. The MEC then is consulted by the local authority to either relax the provisions of the applications for access or provide comments on land use change. So the applications are twofold. There can be an application where someone just needs access, and that's the one that's speaking to then the relaxation for access by the agency for transport. But if it's a land use change application, then similar to route determination, the MEC simply provides comments, and the local authority remains responsible for making the decision. And again, with the bulk infrastructure service providers, they would have to seek MEC approval for any new bulk infrastructure. So once the first step of route determination has been concluded and the second step of preliminary design has been undertaken and concluded, the third step then is undertaken. So preliminary design enables identification of properties that are affected by the railway, affected in that it falls within the proposed railway reserve, and therefore an opportunity to further comment. So the MEC notifies, but it doesn't mean that it's the end of the process. The owner of the property has the right to respond to the notification, whatever that response may be. But the important thing is that legally the GTIA protects the rights of the property owner in and around the entire process. So proclamation, as I've mentioned, the MEC notifies the landowners, occupants, interested and affected parties in writing. The parties have 21 days to make representation or respond to what the proposed proclamation notice. The MEC considers those submissions and then would, based on that interaction, would then proclaim the provincial railway line. That proclamation is published in the Provincial Gazette. So once then the proclamation has happened, we're now at a point where the property owners who own or reside in properties that are affected or identified for expropriation are notified through the same process. So this is the fourth step, which is the final step of defining a future railway line. Owners of land that will be affected are notified following the determination, preliminary design, and proclamation processes. In the event where the property owner has not already been compensated for the same reason in respect of the affected land, the MEC is responsible for any surveying and transfer costs, compensation that may be mutually agreed upon for the property based on the amount the property would have realized if sold on the day of expropriation in the open market, and then an amount to make good any actual financial loss that can be proven by the property owner. If the owner chooses to remain in the property for an agreed point of time after the expropriation has taken place, i.e. after the property has been transferred to the name of the province and compensation has been paid, upon agreement, the owner may remain in the property, but they remain responsible for the rates and maintenance and upkeep of the property until the agreed date of vacating the property. No, thanks for the question. So legally it has to be by registered mail. So we have to find the owner. So until the owner has received and signed for the letter, the 21 days cannot then kick in. So, yeah. Yeah.
An end of it. I'm getting Christmas cards from November last year.
Yeah. No.
So there has to be another system that you use other than registered post.
No, certainly, ma'am. So I'm speaking based on what the Act prescribes, but being where we are cognizant of the challenges in and around, the current postage system and whatever. So, but what we're guaranteeing is that an affected owner will receive notification hand to hand, is such a term? Or courier guy, yes, but as I'm saying, so the 21 days to respond to the proclamation, it only takes effect once you've signed for such a notice. Thanks. Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, I just want to find out, when would this take place? Before the start of the construction, like a year or two before, or would this notification happen as the construction starts?
So we need the land secured before you can actually start construction. So in terms of the sequencing in terms of how it would happen practically, is project of this nature we'll probably construct it in sections. So that we identify which sections we need. Ideally, we want the full extent, right? Because it provides certainty and then there's less risk. Because part of this thing is when you contract with the concessionaire, the person who's going to build the line, they all have a certain timeline within which they must complete the construction. So you don't want to start that if you haven't secured the land. So you want to secure the land and then start the construction. I have a Q&A, but let me take yours and then we... Yeah.
Expropriation. That's
Yes.
my language.
Okay.
EFF. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I want to know, based on on this thing of expropriation, do you know how much budget is being allocated per landlord or per secured land? Let's say, for example, I've got maybe 800 square meter. It will depend on the square meters, or it will depend on the negotiation per individual.
Okay. So may I go to my next slide? If you're not answered, then remind me and I'll answer the question, if that's okay. So in terms of the process, again, there's the notification we spoke about. The owner of the property then has the right to respond or nominate someone to respond on their behalf. So for instance, if you like your attorney to respond on your behalf, or a relative or a child or whatever the case is, the process allows for that, and then the MEC then pays compensation as agreed. This graphic is just to illustrate, what the compensation comprises. So I spoke about the surveying costs, which are carried by the MEC. The bulk of it, of course, then is the actual price that is agreed, which is compensation based on an open market, willing buyer, willing seller principle. And that price is determined, so the province will appoint specialist property evaluators. So the proposal that it comes to the property owner is not determined by any of us here that are representing the GMA, but it will actually be professionals within that space. As an owner, you then respond to that offer. You have the right, so remember, the professional evaluator has not been inside your house, so they don't know what additionalities you have, things that would typically then increase the value of the property. And that's what this process allows. It allows the property owner then to respond to say, I hear you, but I also have this and this and this, and I think my property should be evaluated at this price. And then through that exchange, then there's a point where an agreement is reached on what the compensation amount actually becomes.
Just based on that, for example, like property values in terms of municipal values suddenly increased. They suddenly increased like dramatically compared to what current market value is, which we're having to pay our rates on. So will they take that into account and say, well, here's an inflated municipal value, and this is what we're going to base our starting value at. And we're not going to look at a market value that might be, for example, 2 million rand less.
Very difficult question, but I have to answer it. So I don't pretend to be a property evaluator, sir. As in, I'm not a professional evaluator, but I imagine they consider all those issues when they make the evaluation through which then they make the offer. And that's why I'm saying, so the process then allows you as the owner to respond and raise such issues, and in what your, for lack of better English, what your counter offer becomes to that offer for compensation.
Yeah, that's just the confusing part, because it was the same for market value for rates and taxes. You could submit all your submissions and they were kind of like fobbed off. Even though you could prove market value, they said, no, you need to pay rates and taxes based on this value.
Yeah, so, no, look, I'm not sure how the municipality does it, so I don't want to speak on their behalf. What I can assure you is that we deliberately appoint suitably qualified and experienced evaluators to make sure that this property is fair in and around the evaluation of the property. I've mentioned the issue of the transfer costs, which are also carried by the ABC. And then if the property owner can prove actual financial loss that would result from the compensation, that is also then added to what the compensation amount becomes for the expropriation. And then there's an additional amount which is on a sliding scale, which is over and above the actual value of the agreed amount for the expropriation, as well as if there's any financial loss. And for illustrative purposes, I know this is not very legible. I've made so what this additional compensation comprises is 10% of the first 100,000 of the value of the property, plus 5% of the value between 100,000 and 500,000, plus another 3% of the value between 500,000 and a million rand, and 1% of the value greater than a million rand, capped at 10,000. So the table at the bottom is just for illustrative purposes to say if a property, if the agreed compensation amount or expropriation amount was 2 million rand, over and above that 2 million rand, there will probably be another 55,000 or so added to that amount. And that's my story. Thanks for listening. So
Sorry, I've got on your interactive map, your line's going straight through the middle of my property. It's quite a big property. It's 1 hectare. So my question is, if the line's only 60, 90 meters wide, do you pay me only for what the land you take, or do you pay me for all my land? Because if you go straight through the middle of me, as on your current interactive map, my property is sliced in two. The two sides that remain is worth nothing, or very little. So what's the answer to that? I mean, do you only take what you need, and if you slice somebody else's property, you only pay for that little piece, because that's going to devalue that poor person's property immensely. And there's nothing, again, on your website, it's happened before in previous stages of your project. So if you can please just give some input on that. Thank you.
Okay. I'll be moving to Q&A or...
let's take the question now.
Okay.
We'll still have a full question and answer session at the end, but let's take the question now. So the choice is actually yours ultimately. So if you say, I don't want the property anymore, and also, let me introduce myself first. I'm being very rude. My name is Tebo Khobe, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the GRRIN Management Agency. And the joke in the office is I know where the bodies are buried along the line. So I was here when we designed the system the first time. So I'm not new at this. So in 2005, when we started off the GRRIN, I was here. So I had a chance to work with it. So there's a series of properties in that Nalmapias area and going through Centurion and everything else. Some of the individuals chose to sell just the piece in the middle and then claim the additional compensation of what they feel the value the land has been developed by, but still kept both pieces. In certain cases, some people have chosen to say no, the land is no more worth what it was in the beginning, so I actually don't want it anymore. Some people have chosen to say no, it's been cut in half, I'll keep the one piece, but you buy the rest of it. That is over there, and we've paid for what they call it, for that in accordance. So it is the response we get back when Victor was talking about the issue of the response you give back. And I want to go back to one of the questions that were asked about the value of what we will pay, what the property would have been worth at the point when, what do they call it, when the expropriation occurs. The municipal rates, what do they call it, valuation, it's just like the law, it works in mysterious ways, so I cannot comment about it. It's very strange, you know, in some cases, some properties have been valued lower, some properties have been valued higher, and I've seen now lately they've been ratcheting it up, so that, you know, I don't know for what, but that's what has been happening. But for us is valued by us. You come back to us with a counter offer, and that counter offer would have come from your valuer or they call it your property agent that would have used the valuer, and we would then say, okay, fine, let's what do they call it. Then, you know, in certain cases, we have had places where somebody said, no, I was intending to build a pool, so therefore my property is worth this much with the pool in it. And we said, but you don't have the pool there. So that is what is there, and that can be valued at that point in time. And some people had said to us, look, I have rezoned the land, it's now worth this this much with the development and everything else and all of that. So those are the things that we then, we would then consider when we do exactly that. So it is at the point at which the land gets sold. Okay? So the process of and I'll explain to you, the process of actually going through what we call the MEC can be able to comment on the issues of if you're saying there's property development or changing land use and all sort of things. It's for us to actually, so what used to happen, I've been in the railways for too long. So what used to happen out in in some of the lines that we've built out in the bush, some of the people will go in and then build a game farm or put a game fence around the property. And now suddenly the land is no more based on it just being a pure farm. You might not even have one springbok in that land. But because of that issue, then and the process was not regulated properly. A lot of the state-owned companies like the Escoms and the Transnet and all of that ended up paying at the higher rate. And we have no problem with paying at the higher rate. It's just that it must go through the process, have it assessed by the municipality. If the municipality grants the change in land use, there's nothing we can do. That's what the municipality have granted. We will raise our comments and that's what it will be. And that was important that we raise that issue. Could I go into the presentation before we take any more questions? And so that we have the conversation in full. And sometimes when Victor talks about the section and that section and the MEC shall do this and everything else, then we tend to not have an appreciation of what would have happened for us to get to where we are. Okay. It always helps to turn it on, eh? Okay, so I'll talk to you about the approach, the environmental screening, and ultimately what we had to consider in documentation and the key implications of the literature consideration. And then I want to deal with the GIS maps, which talks to the sensitivity analysis that we had to do in and around environmental, and the environmental screening. Now, one of the other things that we had to take into consideration was station location, station access, and then the gradients of what they call it, of a railway line like ours. And I'll talk to you guys about those as I go through the approach. And it is that integrated approach of station access, station location, the actual design standards for a railway line like ours, and then ultimately superimposing the environmental on top of that then actually determines the line. At times it's not just purely us going, this is where I want the railway line and all of that. In certain cases, there's not much we can do, as you'll see as we go through some of the areas that we've visited and we've had the conversation with them about. Now, in terms of design consideration, the design standards is the ones that apply for a railway line that runs at 180 kilometers an hour. It is not a high-speed line, and I will always have to explain that. It's what we call a higher speed line. It's an intercity metro. And as an intercity metro, then there's the issue of the topography. The land here goes up, down, there's rivulets and small stream that runs through that. And then there's the existing land use, and then the social impact. And the social impact is part of the conversation we're having. Us getting the feedback on the issues that it creates and all of that. And then environmental impact, the geology of the place and the cost, and then the existing bulk services, and then hydrology and economic impact overall. These are the actual design standards for a 180 kilometer line. So one of the things that Victor did explain is that a railway line by its nature, once you go faster, it has to be able to go through flatter curves or shallower curves, as he says. And therefore we're talking about a curve that is like 1.8 or 1,800 meters. That's the minimum curve that we could have. And then when we are forced to have a curved station, In my young life, I had to work in, what do they call it, in England, in a designing company there. There are no straight stations in England. Everything is curved like this, and they are a nightmare of note to be. So we try and avoid them as much as possible. But if we had to end up with a curved station, then it would be on a 600-meter radius. And then our vertical curves are fairly flat. I'll explain this clearly. For us to be able to maintain the high level of service that we maintain, maintenance is a big part of that. The least maintained line, the better it is. Unlike in other rail services in South Africa, we don't maintain our railway line during the day. We actually maintain it within a 4-hour period between 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, that's when the railway line closes, and then the vehicles move out, and ultimately between 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, that's when actually we maintain our railway line. So the least impact that we could have on maintenance, the better it is. And then there's the track spacing, which is like 4 meters apart. And then the staging gradients is, ideally we would prefer a flat station. The reason why is, if I had a vehicle that was broken down and it had to be parked at the station, I can't have the ability for that vehicle to roll away from the station. That's the reason behind the 800-meter vertical curve at stations. And then our turnouts is 1 in 18. So 1 in 18 means this is the straight, and then the angle between the straight and that, it's an 18. So there's 18 meters of that. Now, why 1 in 18? 1 in 18s allow us to go on the straight through at speed, and then on the turnout at 75% of line. And at 75% of line, that still gives us the kind of efficiencies that you don't get normally on any other line. I would have preferred 1 in 20 and 1 in 24s. 1 in 24s, the biggest challenge with them is they're very, very long. And that allows me speed on straight and then speed on the turnout. So that does not change the network speed at all. But we've kept that for consistency and then for stock keeping. And then we use the UIC 60, the 60 kilogram rail, and then the transition curves, which is the bit that comes before a curve or between two curves. That's that. So the design standards that we're using, according to the ENCE, the European norm standard, is that one day on 180 vertical curves on 24,000, and then 1,800 for an absolute minimum, and a preferred minimum of between 2,000 and 1,900, and then absolute minimum on transition lengths is 283, and then the preferred is 268. Now this is the same, and we will share this. This is the same graphic that Victor showed you earlier on, but with the Google Maps interface in the background, or the GIS maps in the background, and then you can be able to remember. This just demarcates the center of the railway line. So literally within the 400, which is 200 meter this way and 200 meter this way, we can literally move the line about within that corridor that has been demarcated. It's not the land take-up. It's the area that within which the servitude will sit, and it could move left or move right, or sometimes stay on where it needs to be. Now, I want to come back to these, because these are some of the proposals that were there, and people are asking, why didn't you use the one proposal and you went to the other proposal? As I continue on, you will see that integrated issue of where stations are located, the vertical curves, the horizontal curves, and then ultimately the environmental issues did determine how we ended up with the railway line that we have now. Now this is the proposed alignment, and when you look at it, this is the Randburg station area, and then, no, this is Little Falls, sorry, my apologies. This is the Little Falls area. It's just before, near Peter Road, closer to Henry Portugal Road. Now, that in itself required us to be able to think about how the station, I'm going to go quite quickly about that. So, how there's access to the station. The location of the station is important, because how we can access the station. Then the next bit of it is that what are the businesses that are located already closer to that area? And in addition to that, then we also had to find a property that allows us the ability to create economic development in the area. It needed to be an open white space that allows us to do property development in and around the station. Unlike the stations that we build now, where property development occurred because of their general location, in this case, we're actually doing intentional property development in and around our stations. So that was also a big consideration of that. And then the mobility routes themselves is how do people access the